I'm going to be speaking about worship this morning, the power of worship to be exact. Next week, we're starting a new series. It's from the book of 1 Peter. The series is called Under Pressure. And these last 2 Sundays, we've just been taking some one-off subjects. Jack spoke last week, and I'd like to speak this week. This has been on my heart for a few months, actually, this particular message. So I'm going to share for around 30 minutes or so, and then I'm going to get some of the singers back up, and we're going to have like a stripped-down worship time for the end bit of our service. Sorry, Gav, not clothing. Stripped down as in we're stripping out the instruments. Please don't plan to leave during that time. That would miss the whole point of this message. We're created to worship God. And so that's the application part of my message, is our singing towards the end. I've been brought up in church. My dad was saved only in his late 20s, and I'm so grateful to God that that was his story, that God rescued him from his life of just doing what he wanted and rescued him into the church of Christ, rescued him into God's family. As a result, myself and my 4 siblings had the privilege of being raised in church. So when it came to church worship and music styles, we've seen quite a lot. Some of the churches we were in had a red hymn book called the Redemption Hymnal. I have a copy of that book on my bookshelf, and I have another copy of the Redemption Hymnal that was the pianist version that had all the sheet music for all of those hymns. There are a few hundred hymns, like 700, 800, 900 odd hymns, and the numbers used to be put up, and we used to sing some of those hymns. There is some glorious theology in those amazing hymns. Then we're part of other churches where instead of having the hymn book, there were chorus books. And there were 2 different colors ones. I think it was red and a purple one, or green and a purple, the Elam chorus books, and then the Maranatha guys produced some chorus books, and those numbers used to go up, and everybody used to flick this. I'm going back into my childhood here. Used to flick and find the number, and the song lyrics of a lot of those choruses were just about this long. Just 4 or 5 sentences. When I go to Golden Warriors, which is our... Ernie, what's the correct way to define Golden Warriors? Seniors. Passionate seniors. And I only found out recently that once a month they have eats there. Every time I've been invited to speak has been on the non-eats week. My last opportunity, which was a few weeks back, was on the week of eats. That happens through over there. We pull the concertina doors shut. There are 80 plus people that arrive. And every time they meet, they sing. And all of those songs take me back, just straight back to my childhood. These amazing lyrics, beautiful songs. A church my mother was raised in, we visited there as kids and as teens pretty regularly. Before church started, very often the brass band would play. And it would be just outside the church doors. There was a beautiful, more traditional type church building. And we'd arrive as kids, and my uncle, and my grandfather, and some of my cousins would be in the brass band. And as little tykes, we would sit on their trumpet cases and listen to 2 or 3 songs of trumpet music. It was just beautiful. And then we'd go into church, and often in the church meeting, the choir that my grandfather and then my uncle conducted, sometimes the choir would sing. Everybody would stay seated. Up in the balcony behind us, the choir would sing, and it was beautiful. It's kind of the 4-part harmonies just beginning to take over and develop. And the hymn numbers would be up on the board in that particular church. When I got a little bit older, our church that I was part of got an overhead projector. I was on overhead projector duty maybe 2 Sundays in the month, and it was a terrifying job. The words that go up on our screen are put up by guys that are kind of hidden. We're very grateful for the work you guys do, but they're kind of hidden in the booth at the back of the building. This overhead projector in our church was on the side of the stage, and it was a bit of a rickety thing shining up. Anybody in church when we still used, those weren't the good old days, okay, the overhead projector days. And there'd be a pile of these slippery transparency sheets, and depending on the mood of the music leader, you had to have those sheets ready at the double, and sometimes the whole batch would fall on the floor, and then you were holding it going up and down, and any mistake was transmitted to the rest of the service, I remember just leaving church absolutely worn out from my duty of doing the overhead transparencies. Now we have projectors and words, but do you know, and I'm just speaking about a short space of life, short space of church history, is that's a tiny segment connected to a whole bigger theme, the idea of worship. A few months ago, my bookmark in my daily readings passed through Psalm 95 through to 100 odd. As I started to read Psalm 95, now all the Psalms are written as songs of praise or songs of something. But as I read Psalm 95, the opening verses just caught me and put me into a little bit of a study over those next few Psalms over the idea of worship response in the Bible. So what I'd like to do this morning is to read Psalm 95, 7 verses, and then Psalm 96, 10 verses. And then I'd like to talk about 10 postures that we see of worship in the Bible. And then, as I said, we're going to land, and we're going to sing. We're going to put this into practice again, because we were singing a little bit earlier. So Psalm 95, verse 1 says this: "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land." It's this beautiful picture of the hands of God crafting the earth. The psalmist says, we get to do stuff in response to this amazing God. We get to sing and shout, and what's all written in this psalm. Come, let us bow down, he says, and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. Why? For he is our God, and we're the people of his pasture. We're the flock under his care. He says that produces in me a desire just to acknowledge him, to kneel in worship. Skipping a few verses takes us to Psalm 96, and it starts this way. It says, "Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth." Not just those whose voices are in tune. Not just the singers. This guy's so passionate, he says everybody in the world should be singing to God. Sing to the Lord, praise his name. Proclaim his salvation day after day. This is worth talking about and singing about every single day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and glory are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, verse 7 says, all you families of nations, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due to his name. Bring an offering. Come into his courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. This book of Psalms, and I've just picked two of them this morning, has got a lot to do about worship. And what I love about these Psalms, what stands out to me, is that the writer addresses the what we should be doing, and he tells us the why we should be doing it. Both of these Psalms start off with the what, and the what is that our worship of God should find joyful expression. It's like if all of the why is true, if you believe all of the stuff that he carries on writing, he says, well, surely, I'm using Steve Wimble words. here. Surely it follows that you'd want to find joyful expression to these truths. Come, he says, let us sing for joy to the Lord. That's what we should be doing. And then he talks about the why, because of who he is and what he has done. That is, in essence, the idea of worship. I'd like to show you this what and the why in these two passages that I've just read. I took Psalm 95, and those are the verses I've just read, just in smaller font. And these two blocks, just click onto the next slide, talk about the what. So verse 1 and 2, come, let's sing, let's shout, let's come before him, let's extol him with music and song. That's doing stuff. Verse 6, come, let's bow, let's kneel. That's the what. What should I be doing? Worship should look like something. What should I be doing in my joyful expression? But it's not just a list of to-dos. Okay, arrive, 9 o'clock, sing a couple of songs. No, he's just like, worship should bubble out, and then he gives us the reason we should be so excited. The why. Because God is a great God. He's a great king above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The mountain peaks belong to him. He's made the sea and formed the dry land. And then I love this verse 7. Why should we worship? Because he is our God. There's something so personal about this. We are the people of his pasture. Preached on Psalm 23 the other day. This is taken from a different point of view. I belong to him. He's my shepherd and I'm his. He looks out for me. I am part of the flock under his care. I haven't been abandoned. I'm not orphaned. Spiritually, I belong in his family. I belong in his flock. He says, that makes me want to worship. The next Psalm, Psalm 96, I've just taken the first 6 verses. I read 10. But again, the first block is the what? Sing, 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 proclaim, declare. Why? Because great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. To put that in another way, he says the theme about God's greatness is the most noble theme that you could sing about. We design for song and music. Even if you don't consider yourself very musical or don't think you can sing in tune particularly, there's something inside of us that's designed for music. I'm always interested at sports stadiums. When one of the sports team gets injured, the DJ just cranks up the music, it's like all the crowd just start bopping a bit like, oh, sorry, the guy might have broken a leg, but it doesn't matter, we're enjoying the music. It's like because we're wired for some of that. But at just a purely human level, the great themes of music are human romantic love or heartbreak, and then just stuff talking about my feelings. And the psalmist says, actually, there's an even higher theme. None of those are wrong, per se. But he says, great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. The highest theme of any song would be God's love and his greatness. He is to be feared above all gods. All the other gods are idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and glory are in his sanctuary. Which, again, just to go back to that slide, the what is that our worship of God. If you have a relationship with God, if you are, to use some Bible words, born again, if you're a Christ follower, if you're a disciple, our worship should find some joyful expression. If you, by the way, this is a really important thing. If you're not yet a Christ follower, do you know that this great shepherd that we're talking about, singing about, is so eager to bring us into his family, into his flock? If you're here today and you don't yet have a relationship with Christ, it is no coincidence that you came in this morning. It might have seemed like a series of odd coincidences to you, but behind the scenes, God looks for ways to bring us to himself. He looks for ways to engage us in relationship. And no matter your questions, the answers to a whole lot of questions are only found after taking a step of faith. There's not a single person in the world who engaged in a relationship with God only after they had all their questions answered. Not one single person, because then it wouldn't require any faith. And there are some questions that are too big for us to understand the answer to in this world. One day with him, we will understand a whole lot better. And he invites us into this relationship. In that relationship, then, our worship should find joyful expression because of who he is and because of what he has done. This word worship it's a beautiful word. And a couple of just comments to make about it. Worship actually comes from an old English word. So I'm doing the English now here. That is worthship. And that is really what the essence of worship is about. Our worship is about God's worthship. His worth, his majesty. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. That's worship. I heard somebody put it like this. Worship is all that I am responding to all that he is. All that I am responding to all that I know about God, that connection is worship. Jesus, in John chapter 4, said this. He said, his worshipers, God's worshipers, must worship in spirit and in truth. In other words, it's worship that starts on the inside. It's got much more to do with the state of my heart than on the outside. But if there's something happening on the inside, generally my outside is going to know about it. If all of these things are true about worship, then it follows that actually all of my life should be worship before God. It's not just limited to a few 20 minutes of singing on a Sunday morning. That is not the full extent of my worship. If worship is about his worship and me responding to who he is, then your vocation should be a form of worship. And your relationships, engaging with others, should be bringing him glory. That's a form of worship. Our leisure time, if well spent, should be a form of worship. All of life is worship. But there's a particular expression of worship that finds itself in song, as we see from these Psalms. So, from these verses, I've drawn 7 different postures of worship, and then I've got another 3 from a couple of other Psalms. If you've got a way of taking notes, I'm just going to be shooting through these things. But 10 postures of worship in the Psalms. Number 1, singing for joy. Singing for joy, as we see in Psalm 95, verse 1. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. When we sing praises to God, we join in a rich tradition of people who've been singing praises to God for centuries. Do you know that in the Bible there are 185 songs recorded, explicitly referred to as songs? On top of that, there's a whole lot more references to people singing songs, no words mentioned. And then a whole lot of other writings in the Bible could have been songs, but also could have been spoken word type poetry. The first song in the Bible goes as far back as Moses. And interestingly, the last song in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, is referred to as the Song of Moses, and they've got similar themes. There are so many different styles and expressions of song. If you just go into different cultures around the world, you will hear so many different variations of tunes and melodies and styles of song. And the Bible doesn't suggest that is the only style that you have to sing in. It just says sing. Sing for joy. It doesn't even say if you can sing in tune, sing. In fact, Psalm 95 in the ESV says, come, let's make a joyful noise to the Lord. That's a pretty catch-all phrase. If you've got anything in your body that can make a noise, use it to worship. The second thing, posture of worship, is shouting aloud. Again, Psalm 95. It says, don't just sing, shout it. Well, you know, Steve, worship is really just an introspective connection between you and God. You've got difficulty finding that in the Bible. Interestingly, how's this? In the book of Revelation, it uses the word loud 21 times. That's in 22 chapters. Loud voice, they spoke out loud. It also mentions silence once. In Revelation 8, it says, now there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. I'm not suggesting that our services should be as loud as they could possibly be. that we're trying to blast everybody's eardrums. But I would like to suggest that there's more biblical precedent for loud than nothing. Again, there's lots of stuff about just reflection and quiet, but there's this shout aloud idea that I'd like to suggest that when we gather together as a community of people who are this excited about God, the sound guy should be under a little bit of pressure to keep that volume going, to be able so that whoever's up front can be heard above the voices. Can I put a little tussenhakkies here? We are pretty sensitive to the amplified volume levels throughout our services, and some of you might not believe me, but it is true. I'm getting feedback from people. Do you know that seated here this morning, everybody's ears have got different levels of sensitivity? I spoke to the audiologist about this. Everybody's got slightly different levels. So we're trying to pick a bull's eye knowing that different people respond in different ways. Our aim is not to crank this thing to blow everybody's eardrums. But on some Sundays, it might be too quiet for you. Other Sundays, it just feels too loud. I had a conversation a couple of months back with Ernie. And I was asking about volume and just worship. I touch in with him occasionally. Because as you get older, your ears get more sensitive. So I want to be certain that our entire church, I'm hearing from all different ages. I'm asking Ernie just for feedback. And he said something that totally inspired me. He says, some Sundays, I do find it a little bit loud. And he says, some Sundays, I can't follow all the words. Sometimes the songs just seem like the words are going too fast. But he said, for me, that's not what worship is about. And no matter what happens on a Sunday, I just want to put my head back and worship God. Because that's at the essence of worship. It's what's on the inside connecting with Him. Thank you, Ernie, for inspiring me in that way. Should be shouting aloud to God. Thirdly, third posture of worship is giving thanks. This is just next in line. Let us come before Him with thanksgiving. This is an injunction. It's before you come before Him with your problems, and He's open to helping us with the problems. It's like we need to lead in with giving thanks. If you can think of nothing to thank God for just yet, it's like we need to pause, step back a little bit and say, okay, what is there to give thanks for? A, I'm alive. B, I'm drawing in breath. If you've got physical health, you've got something to say thankful for. If you've only got 2 health problems, you've got all the other stuff to be thankful for. If you've got some kind of meaningful relational connection with another human, with other humans, friends, family, etc., more to be thankful for, etc., etc. Let us come before Him with thanksgiving. That's a posture of heart. Number 3. Number 4, music and song. Next line down, extol Him with music and song. There's a whole lot of instruments mentioned in the book of Psalms. It's as if the psalmist looks around at all the instruments available in the day and says we should praise Him with the harp, we should praise Him with the trumpet, we should praise Him with the lyre, with the cymbals, with the clashing cymbals. I believe we should look at all musical forms, all instruments, and say we should be praising God with everything that exists. Do you know, I read an interesting article this last week. Scientifically, they've got no idea why our brains respond to music. It produces, if there's music that you enjoy, it produces dopamine in your brain, the feel-good hormone response that relates to a whole lot of other great things in our lives that are essential for survival. Music's not essential for your survival. So the scientists say, well, from an evolutionary point of view, why do we enjoy it? The Bible's answer is because God loves music and He's placed it inside of us. Now, here's another interesting thing. From a purely human perspective, most people after the age of 30 stop listening to new styles of music. So when you or I, between the age of around 13, from the start of adolescence, whenever that was, into our young adult or early 20s years, whatever musical style you were drawn to in that time will probably stay your preferred style for the rest of your life. That's not true for every single person, but by and large. And I've heard people say, this music that youngsters, when I was in my teen years, oh, this music you young people listen to is rubbish. Wasn't as good as the music we had. I am now listening to some of the music my kids are listening to and thinking, my goodness. And then there's other stuff that are like, hey, this is pretty cool. Who is that artist? What? And I'm trying to engage with it a little more. I don't have as much time as them. I have observed, I don't have any scientific study for this, I have observed that when somebody becomes a Christian, in the first couple of years, whatever they are exposed to as church music generally remains their preferred musical style for the rest of their lives. And they can cope with other musical styles, but when that song comes on, oh, it's like, now we worship. Now I'm just putting up with all the young people stuff. And in a multi-generational church, this continues to be something we've got to be aware of. Is the older I get, turned 40 last year, every couple of years there are new musical styles coming through. And if all I'm saying is, well, when I was, that's how it should be, I might miss out on all the other varieties of worship that God has available for me. Again, there's no prescription here. It just says music, song. Number 5, bowing and kneeling. When did you last just bow down and worship, privately or publicly? I don't want to make too much of a scene. Well, it doesn't need to be. Bowing and kneeling before God is a sign of surrender and submission. There's a beautiful verse in Genesis 47. Because occasionally in my worship, I feel that my response at the moment just to kneel before you, God. But sometimes my knees get a bit sore. And I know there might be people here that physically kneeling is just difficult. You know, if you're going down, you're not getting back up again because of having a gammy knee or whatever it is. Do you know that there's a catch-all verse, a beautiful one in Genesis? Jacob, aged 147, it just says, and he worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. It's like, I might not be able to dance around anymore, God, but I'm leaning. This staff is holding me up, and I worship you from this posture. Bowing and kneeling is part of a response, a Bible response to God. 6thly, proclaiming and declaring. We spoke about doing it in song, lyrically, but spoken word, God's stories in my life are a form of worship. It says here in Psalm 96, proclaim his salvation day after day, declare his glory among the nations. If I find an outlet, an opportunity to talk or engage with people about God and what he's done in my world and in my life, it's a form of worship, declaring, proclaiming, telling. I had 2 beautiful sets of stories in this regard. Last week, Sunday, after church, I happened to bump into 1 or 2 of the volunteers from our City Hill Kids team who said to me, this week was incredible. All the kids were invited to come and share stories of what God's been doing in their life, and they had tear marks in their eyes as they're telling me. On Monday, back in the office, I heard again from our kids team as the children and some of the adults began to tell the stories of what God was doing, there was such a tenderness. People were weeping. That's a form of worship, declaring. I had another beautiful interaction with 2 sets of a grandmother and a set of grandparents who separately in different ways said, our children don't come to church that much, but we're so eager for our grandkids to engage with faith that we've been bringing our grandkids to church, going out of their way to make it all possible because they want their grandkids to hear the stories of what God's done in their life and through the church, etc. This is a form of telling. This is declaring. This is worship. The 7th thing I take from these verses is down in Psalm 8. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. This is a reference in the Old Testament of bringing an offering to the temple as was commanded in the law. When I think of this word offering, it's something I offer, something I bring. Now, everything I have belongs to God. Romans chapter 12 says, bring your bodies as a living sacrifice. So my whole life I'm offering, I'm saying, God, my life, my world, me, my body, it belongs to you. This is a form of worship. Paul says in Romans 12. That form of worship, my life being a worship act to God, extends to God's money in my possession. You might have heard some of the guys, if they're leading a meeting, they say, guys, now as an extension of our worship, we're going to bring our tithes and give our offerings. That's just not a clever little catchphrase, extension of our worship. When I bring an offering, that represents my time. That represents something else I could have purchased. As my tithe is being given, even if it's via EFT or whatever form it takes, as my offerings are being given, that is a form of worship, special form of worship. And that opens, biblically, that opens a channel for God to bring supply into my life in a whole variety of different ways. I'm not teaching on that this morning. I'm just saying this is a form of it's a part of my worship. Bringing an offering. I'm not bringing an offering for humans, bringing it for God. Number 8, 9, and 10 come from 3 other Psalms. Raising hands is a posture of worship in the Bible. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. If I raise hands, sometimes it's a sign of victory. Again, if I'm watching a team play, and I happen to be an expressive watcher, whatever sport I'm watching, my boys play, and they're up against it, there's a tight game on, and something happens and they click, I'm cheering and I'm raising my hand, come on, yeah! And I have some parents look at me in a little odd way, but most of the others that are happy are also doing the same. But raising hands can also be a sign of surrender, a sign of submission, a sign of receiving, a sign of reverence. I remember hearing about this when I was a boy in junior school. And that week I thought, well, I want to try and raise my hands. And it was a form of worship. As I raised my hands, I felt so self-conscious. It felt like the entire building was looking at me. Although I knew it wasn't true, in my brain, it was screaming back at me like, get those hands down. And then I got more used to the practice of it, and I realized this has got nothing to do with any other human being. It's got to do with sometimes my enjoyment of my celebration in God. We sing some incredible lyrics here. The Lamb on the throne, the one who rose from the grave, and I'm like, I cannot help myself. And there's other times we sing of surrender, and I'm just, God, I'm all in with this. Sometimes I'm singing, sometimes I'm silent. Sometimes I get distracted. But raised hands, if you've never done it before, might feel self-conscious. Don't do it for any other human being. But sign of surrender, sign of victory, sign of receiving. Number 9, ninth posture, is clapping. Clap your hands, all you nations. Shout to God with cries of joy. This morning, after we finished singing the first 2 songs, it was so anthemic. Our singing the words, beautiful words. And as the song finishes off and the musos are pulling, they're doing their skilled part. As they pull it down, as a congregation, we just happen to applaud, which I think is such a great way of honoring God. Not for a minute am I suggesting that unless you're clapping, you're honoring God. Please don't mishear me. I'm not suggesting that unless you're running around, but inward worship should find outward expression. And the Bible celebrates the clapping of hands. There's a joy, there's a form of worship in that. And 9thly, or 10th, and there's many more, but I've just picked 10 for this morning. Let them praise His name with dancing and make music to Him. From Psalm 149. Jumping around, celebrating what God has done, whatever your form of dance happens to take. You know what's weird is that for a whole lot of people who you became Christians at whatever stage, you had a patch of life where you used to worship the devil, not explicitly, but implicitly. And in various nightclubs and in various forms, you danced with great abandonment and great joy. And sometimes under the influence of alcohol, just got free in your motion, movements. Why should God, who is far greater than any expression, any other expression, why should God get us as the frozen chosen? If you mishear me this morning, you say, Steve got up there, he's just trying to rev us up and get everybody. No. Well, yes and no. I believe that biblically our worship, there's got to be expression attached to it. And sometimes I think we allow our internal peer pressure amongst ourselves in the church just to keep us even more sad. I occasionally hear some people say, well, I plan to get to church 15 or 20 minutes late so that I can miss the singing, just get there for the message. Like, why would you want to do that? Well, if I put it in these words, so you want to miss the time where as a congregation we get together worshiping God in song, with music, with sometimes shout, sometimes quiet. We get to worship Him and declare His glory and change our minds, and our ears start to hear our lips talk out about how great He is. I'd prefer not to do that, thanks. And if we sing at the end of the meeting, that's an easy getaway. But they're just finishing off with a song. No, we're finishing off with worship. Once, at the previous church we switched it around. We preached at 9 o'clock and then sang afterwards. And we had people so indignant who arrived at 20 to 10. They're like, I get here late on purpose to miss the singing, and now all I got was the singing. I didn't say this, but you better get used to it, because when we're together forever, we're going to be doing a whole lot of singing. I don't know what the services there or stuff looks like, but do you know the book of Revelation is full of the worship of God? When we worship together like this, we look backwards at all that He has done for us. We join with millions of Christ followers who have sung and worshiped in different ways in human history. When we worship together in community like this, we look forwards into the future, that He holds us in His hands, that He is returning and that He will keep us until the end, that He's got our past and that He's got the future. We look upwards at all that He is and will always be. We look upwards at His strength and at His power, His grace, mercy, and kindness, the fact that He loves us and keeps us and is looking out for us and has me in the palm of His hand today. When we worship together like this, we're looking inwards at the work that He is doing in our lives. It's a moment to pause and to see God is at work. I'm different to how I was 5 years or 10 years ago, that He is changing us from one degree of glory to the next. And when we worship together, we get to look around at His redemptive work in the world and say, I would not be worshiping with these people if it wasn't for Christ. The book of Revelation, which speaks of the future kingdom, has got so many songs of praise. And I'd like to read just one of them in closing. And the musos that are coming back up, please do so now. It says in heaven, they shout this: salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb, Revelation 7. And it says a whole lot more people join in this praise, singing Amen, which, by the way, means so be it. Praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and forever. Amen. Would you stand together with me, please?